And a very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us today. It is my joy and honor to introduce you, if you do not yet know, the inimitable Dana Jean. Dana is our Director of Youth Ministries and Outreach at Transfiguration and has been on staff with us a little over a year. Is that right? Like a year and a quarter?
Just a year and a month. July 1st of last year.
Gosh, wow.
It's been forever.
Dana is full of energy and creativity and brings a joie de vivre to everything that she does. She's a deep theological thinker and an excellent leader, and it is my joy to welcome you this morning as our leader. So take it away, Dana.
Thank you. That is, wow, quite a bit. Thank you. Before I start, I was really just going to tease that I'd like to log a complaint with my superiors for having put me in the mix, not just of, Master of Divinity, demon, all the collars that you can imagine, but following a purple shirt. Like, following the bishop is not my idea of, something easy. So
to be fair to us, you were originally going to teach last week, and you graciously gave up your spot for the bishop. So
I've had second
thoughts. We did
not
do that on purpose to you.
No, I've had second thoughts ever since.
Yeah.
I have two screens going here, so I promise I am looking at you and also at some notes. But I wanted to sort of joke about that, though, because not only do I follow this amazing group of teachers and preachers and clergy, but on top of that, because I swapped dates with the bishop, I get dealt the hand of speaking about one of the two most important tenets of our faith, the crucifixion. So, no small task here. And I want to warn you in advance that Rebecca is being very gracious by calling me a deep theological thinker. That is not at all how I would describe myself. But here's the thing. I do joke sort of jokingly and being self-deprecating, but I want you all to hear, I think it is important for us to consider the crucifixion less as a lesson and less as being taught by someone, right? And more of something to connect to on a spiritual and emotional even level. And so I think it's important to hear these stories and walk through them together as, the people who don't have seminary degrees and who have been transformed by the stories, because that's what they are intended to do. Jesus's death on the cross is intended to transform us and change us, and that's not an academic or intellectual thing. So any of you would be qualified to sit here and speak about this today, in my opinion, as long as you, like me, are changed daily by the fact that he died for me and for us. I am going to share, let's see, somewhere I'm going to share a screen. I'm sorry, every time I do this, I realize I have the wrong screen up. So give me 1 second. Zoom is taking over my background. Okay. I also want to warn you real quick that the text of what I'm saying, they're just sort of a little bit of eye candy to keep the people who, I'm sorry, am I freezing? Okay. Sorry, I got a message that my Wi-Fi went haywire for a second.
Just for a moment, you're back with us now.
Okay. So the slides are not meant to be any sort of heavy text that you need to read with, along with me speaking or anything. They're just sort of to help me keep on track, and to, for anyone who is a visual learner like me, it sort of, helps me remember what we just talked about. So as I was saying, I do think the crucifixion is is less of an academic activity for us today in a Bible study like this. And so I want to, let's see, sorry, I am playing with two mice here and not sure which is which. Like I said, I think we need to be transformed by this. So, all right, I want to tell you first, though, why Mark's account of the crucifixion resonates with me, and why I connect with it, I think maybe even a little more than the other Gospels. Several years ago, let me see if I do my math right, I think it was 11 or 12 years ago, I was still, after many years, what we would call a creaster. I came to church for Christmas and Easter. I maybe went to church for funerals and weddings too in that time of my life, but I was not very committed to my faith. And I am married to a Haitian man. And so when the earthquake hit Haiti, our family sort of had a crisis. And I didn't realize it at the time. None of us, my husband and I didn't, we were sort of on the same wavelength about this, but didn't realize it. It's not really a wavelength, it was God. But we both sort of hit rock bottom and were questioning, why would God do this to the people of Haiti? Why would he allow these things to happen to what was at the time and is again now the poorest country in our hemisphere? It was a real crisis moment, and it was rough. We had moments where we just didn't know for sure that there was a God that we wanted to believe in, because we felt abandoned, we felt alone, and for weeks we did not hear from family members. I will say, just as a caveat or as a sidetrack here, we did not lose anyone in our immediate family. We are so fortunate. But for 3 weeks, we weren't sure. We didn't hear from my mother-in-law, my sisters-in-law, several uncles, just many of our family we thought were dead. And so we felt abandoned and alone. And I remember sitting up at night asking God, why would you allow this to happen? So I think we've all had those moments in life. I imagine many of you had that after 9/11 or Katrina or the death of a loved one, a divorce, any of those challenges in our lives that we all go through, right, that take us down. And we question where God is. So to me, that earthquake was one of the bigger ones in my life, and the one that brought me back into my faith in this really powerful way that allowed me to see the crucifixion and the suffering of Jesus in a new way. And it happens after that, by the way. I was Catholic before that, and we started going to an Episcopal church after the earthquake. And the first small group Bible study I ever did was the Gospel of Mark. So I remember sitting in that study thinking, where are all the words? Where are all the things that I remember about these stories, as you know, that we were taught as children and that I've sort of half listened to here and there over the years? Where are all those words? And the details just weren't there, because as you all know by now, Mark is frugal with his words. So I would say, Mark, as Rebecca was saying before some of you joined, up until a certain point in the gospel, according to Mark, it's really quick and really short and fast, and then he sort of slows down. When we get to chapter 15, I feel like he rushes through it a bit again, maybe not as quickly as the earlier chapters, but in this expedient delivery where he is almost ruthless in his writing, especially about the public execution, where other accounts put more words around the drama of that scene. So Luke, for example, offers details like the criminal asking Jesus to remember him in heaven, And Luke tells us that Jesus asked God to forgive the people doing this to him because they didn't know what they were doing. John tells us about the women standing near the cross and Jesus saying, saying to the disciple he loved, "This is now your mother, right? You are her son, she is your mother." Matthew tells us that the chief priests and Pharisees warned Pilate that Jesus said he would rise in 3 days, and calls for them to secure the grave so that the disciples don't, sort of fake a resurrection. So all the accounts are different, and Mark just sort of strips it bare. He takes this really just concisely through. There's not anything extra. We get the bare bones, and he crafts this story of Jesus's death in what I would say is raw and unfiltered, in this very naked way. And the genius to me of Mark is that he packs this chapter full of people and still leaves us no choice but to see Jesus alone. There's so many people in this chapter. I love that. But Jesus is very much alone on that cross, very much alone up until that cross even, abandoned at every single turn. And so going back to my earthquake moment, that's what it feels like when we are in crisis, right? That we are, even if we're surrounded by family and friends, that we are utterly alone, that our suffering is, in isolation, even if it is not. And I think that's one of the reasons, at least for me, that Mark resonates so much. So I don't think this chapter can be picked apart the way other chapters maybe could have been, especially like the parables where you can pick and choose little pieces of it and go into depth. I think for our sake today, I'm going to walk us through it, going through some of the details in a way I hope that will connect us to the emotion of it and point out some of the things that Mark leaves in and some of the things that he doesn't put into his account. And just as a reminder, in chapter 14, we left off, Jesus had already prayed in the garden. He had been betrayed by Judas, condemned, denied by Peter, all those things, right? So we are at the point where Mark takes us quickly. Here are all the people. Mark moves us quickly through the consultation with the council. And he leaves us to wonder why Jesus was silent in response to all the charges. And I want us to hear that silence, not as a silence of contempt or fear or anger, but this eloquent, beautiful silence that speaks volumes to Pilate, who didn't want the truth after all, and was also really surely not used to silence when he asked a question. So the people he normally accused were probably not standing there silently. So I think Jesus shows us that sometimes words are a waste of time. Sometimes there is just not anything to say. And then Mark takes us really quickly through the festival, just for a second, and he sort of leaves our heads spinning as the shrieking mob in all their malice choose Barabbas, of all people, a murderer, over Jesus. And Mark doesn't give us any real explanation for that, doesn't give us a backstory for Barabbas, except that he is described as a murderer and a revolutionary. We know nothing about this man that was chosen over Jesus. And then Mark moves us on, and we hear the soldiers mocking Jesus. And for the first time, we see that violence, where they strike him on the head, they spit on him, they twist this crown of thorns onto his head. And Mark ignores that wrenching of our gut, thinking of those things happening to our Lord. He just keeps moving. And Golgotha, taking us to Golgotha, we stop for a split second with Simon of Cyrene, who was not a volunteer, but compelled to help, compelled to carry the cross. And we don't get a backstory of this guy either. We know that he is the father to Alexander and Rufus. That is all we get. And then we move on.
Voluntold.
Yes, voluntold.
Voluntold.
So we arrive at the place of the skull, and Jesus doesn't drink the wine, and they crucify him. That's that. We've gotten there so very quickly in Mark, in just a few short lines. And he's left us with our Lord hanging on a cross between two bandits. And again, no real details on those guys. He didn't even mention if one of them actually did say, "Remember me in heaven." I asked myself, where are the nooks and crannies of the story? We're going so quickly, so barely through the story. We get nothing but the essentials, and they're gut-wrenching. So it's a bare bones telling, and of all the things for there to be abundance of, the mocking. There's mocking and derision. Do we catch that? There's no abundance of anything in this story except the mocking. In the midst of all these bare bones, Mark just makes sure that we catch that we are not going to miss that Jesus was mocked and taunted and scorned the whole way through. And then Mark dims the lights in case we aren't already speechless. That darkness of the story hits. And Jesus asks God why he has forsaken him. And we get a brief throwback, sort of, to the Old Testament where David asked the same thing. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. We get two quick references to the Old Testament, David and then Elijah, but Mark gives us no real clues whether the crowd was mocking Jesus by saying he's waiting for Elijah, or if that was just a reference to the prophecy in Malachi that Elijah would come before the Messiah. Maybe they had actually started to realize. Mark tells us that Jesus refused the wine. He cried out and breathed his last, but in Mark's account, we don't even get to hear it's finished.
Yeah.
But at this point, we get, and I didn't put this on the slide, this is coming in another one, we get a little faint glimmer of hope, just a flicker of light from the Roman centurion of all people, that he actually realized that this is the Son of God. Having failed to see it the whole way through, this Roman centurion, really unlikely candidate, an officer in the empire's army, recognized the Son of God. And so I wonder if it's just me at that point, but if we need to stop and take a breath, like Bishop Smith mentioned actually last week, because Mark goes so soon, we could miss that tiny little detail about the centurion. But it's hard to tell if that's the stopping point, if that's the breathing point. I would say it is. I think that we need to stop before we even get to the Marys and to Salome, because there's this little detail of the curtain. And it's so easy if we're reading through Mark with so few words to just go right past that. I think we stand, though, at this point with Mary and Salome and all those women who cared for and provided for and followed Jesus. And we realize this is it. This is the crux. This is what we needed. And this is where we stop and wait. So Mark rushed through the whole scene, condensing it masterfully, right? He's a genius in this, but all his details are horrible. And really, after this, we have just very little left to read. So it really would be easy to keep going. But that curtain sort of sticks with us. Sorry, I'm freezing up again. Y'all there?
We can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I get the notice that my Wi-Fi is messing up, of course, at that moment. So if we don't stop, we miss this curtain torn from top to bottom, removing the barrier between the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant. We miss that because this guy, Jesus, is willing to die for us, that now God's presence, has been open to each of us. He's no longer hidden, and the barriers are not there except for the ones we build ourselves. So I think that is like the breathing point in this story. But I want to mention again, there was the Roman centurion. I think the curtain is our view of hope from Mark before we get to the resurrection. But then he leaves us these two little things. The Roman centurion, of course, like I said, realizes at the end that Jesus is in fact the Son of God. And I wonder, is that a message to us too? And for all the people in our lives who have maybe not come to Christ yet, that it is never too late. That's what the centurion says to me. It is never too late. And then we have Joseph. I love Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph is a respected member of the council. And at the beginning of this chapter, he was one of the ones in the consultation hearing these charges about Jesus, or charges against Jesus, and sending him to his death, essentially. Joseph was a secret lover of Jesus, waiting for the coming of the Lord. And Joseph was bold and asked for the body of Jesus. And now what we don't know from Mark is that is not done. Mostly people who were crucified, as Mark describes them, are bandits, but were rebels and revolutionaries and charged with being against the empire. They're traitors. And so they're crucified and tormented for days until they die. And no one asks for their bodies because it is shameful and potentially dangerous. And so Joseph asks for this body of this man sentenced to death by the council that he was a member of. And then Joseph gently takes it, wraps it in linen, and puts it in the tomb with Mary and the Marys and Salome, the Marys watching. I don't remember now if Salome was there. Anyway, Mark leaves us with this member of the Sanhedrin that charged, convicted, and crucified Jesus, and then laid him gently to rest. And I wonder again if that is a message to us. Not only that it's not too late, it's never too late, but also one last chance for Jesus, for us to see in Jesus the flipped kingdom, right? That these are not the people who look and act faithfully. They are not the ones who on the surface have paint this pretty little picture of what it means to be faithful and a follower of Jesus. They're a mess. They are not who we would expect to be caring for our Lord this way. So it's the unexpected, again, as we see often in the scriptures. So we're left here with Jesus on the cross. And what I think is most powerful about Mark's account of the crucifixion is that it reads, and these are not my words, these are from a Presbyterian theologian or pastor that wrote a book about Mark, that Mark reads like a litany of abandonment. And I think that's how I experience this chapter, a litany of abandonment. He asserts that every step of the way, Mark shows us exactly how abandoned and alone Jesus is. First, we see the disciples fall away with Judas and Peter denying him. And, by the time he gets to the council, they are not in the story. Then we see the Romans, who, irony of all ironies, are threatened by the Prince of Peace. They really had a thirst for blood, and by the time Jesus was crucified, before Jesus was crucified, should have had that thirst quenched by everything they did to him. But still they cast lots for his clothes, they mocked him, and they did everything they could, abandoning any sense of justice or compassion, leaning into the most brutal, hateful parts of their souls, abandoning all humanity, abandoning Jesus. They don't offer even 1 ounce of care for him. Then, of course, he's abandoned on the way to the cross by the people in the crowds who just on Sunday before had been laying palm fronds for him to walk on and cheering as he entered. Now they're ridiculing him and mocking him, and even the chief priests, the clergy, join in mocking. In Mark's account, the bandits too. The bandits mock him too and taunt him from their crosses beside him. Perhaps the worst, though, not perhaps, I think definitely the worst, is that at this point Jesus calls out asking why God too has abandoned him. And we could argue all day whether he was recalling the Psalms of Lament, like David's, or if he actually felt abandoned by God, or if he actually was abandoned by God. We could debate those things until the cows come home, as my dad would say. Either way, though, the Lord reaches this point where he feels that abandonment. He is so low that he questions God, who's supposed to be for us, right? Not against us, always with us, faithful, benevolent, loving, while Jesus hangs on a cross. And this is that abandonment that we know, we recognize, it resonates with us, because haven't we all felt, and aren't we all feeling, moments of this, even now during this pandemic, with the violence against people of color and the political strife? Don't we wonder where God is? This is why Mark resonates, I think. He leaves it open for us to think about these things and to feel them. So the final abandonment, though, is not just that Jesus feels abandoned by God, but like adding insult to injury, the Marys are not even with him in this story. They are at a distance. They are removed from Jesus. They are not near him. And so he's been abandoned by the women of all people. So Mark leaves us there in that abandonment. For now, at least. So I don't know if y'all have read any Frederick Buechner, but there's this quote that I love. The gospel is bad news before it is good news. It's the news that man is a sinner, to use the old word, that he is evil in the imagination of his heart, that when he looks in the mirror all in a lather, what he sees is at least 8 parts chicken, phony, slob. That is the tragedy. But it is also the news that he is loved anyway, cherished, forgiven, bleeding to be sure, but also bled for. I think Mark does this genius job of showing us that the good news feels like bad news first. Our Lord was killed by people probably more similar to us than we care to admit. Sinners with evil in our hearts, chickens, phonies, slobs. Humankind at its most depraved, willing to abandon the one who loves us most. But Mark also leaves us with enormous hope, of course. That curtain, the centurion, Joseph. He leaves us with all of those. And of course, he leaves us with chapter 16, the resurrection, because the story doesn't end here at the cross. St. Paul didn't say that. Yes. Well, Casey had them read ahead, so they're good. They know this.
That's right.
But so St. Paul did not tell us that we preach the crucifixion. He told us that we preach Christ crucified. And so Christ, though crucified, did not stay on that cross. And as much as I love reading this story, and at moments I really need to remember Jesus himself feeling abandoned and being in darkness, that's not where we're meant to reside. So I think that is where I'm going to leave it. There's always so much to say. Anyway, and I don't know how I am at all on time. I'm so sorry. I'm not.
You're right on time for this
Okay.
next exercise. So would you like to give us our Lectio assignment, and then
I would.
the rooms.
I would, if you don't mind. So when I do this I've done this with multiple groups, but I've done this with the youth recently, that I have them read it and then sit in silence for a good pregnant pause, that taking a deep breath after hearing it once, not saying anything, just sitting in silence, and then reading it a second time and discussing the question, what is God saying to you in this passage? What to you specifically, right? What is God saying to you? And then reading it the third time and talking about what you would say to God in response. And what I try to do with my groups is make them start their sentences with Lord or God. So speak directly to him after that third time. And it becomes more, in a group like this, like a conversational prayer. So we are saying these things to our Lord who hears us, and our friends here in our small groups will hear us as well and join us in those prayers. Make sense? And I'm choosing verses 33 to 39. Should I share it, or are we good? Do you all have that?
I think we're good. Everybody has been pretty great about bringing a Bible.
Awesome.
So 33 to 39, I just put it in the text, the chat for the thread. So everybody's got the questions, which are different from our usual questions. And I'd like to encourage you to engage in the difference and try this, because Lectio doesn't mean just one thing. Try it from another angle. And I love that Dana is asking us to begin to pray at the end of our Lectio time.
I hope that's all right.
That's a great idea. I'm going to assign us to groups now. Dana, because you are the leader, I'll invite you to you'll get a group invite, just hang back and disregard it for now. And that way everyone has a chance to talk in groups without the leader in the midst. So let's see, breakout rooms. And I want to have small enough rooms. Here we go.